Hello everyone, I'm Evan Ramirez, and today the claim of fact that I will be refuting is that easy access to abortion has a harmful effect on society because we have widespread access to abortion clinics and people are using abortion as birth control alternative and are developing mental health issues during the process. So the person I'm refuting really backed this up with 3 secondary claims. And the first one was, women have easier access to abortion clinics now than they ever have before, which actually is not very true, because from an article that I read by Nancy Northup, the president and chief executive of the Center of Reproductive Rights, she says that since 2011, state politicians have enacted more than 200 restrictions that make it harder for women to obtain safe, legal abortion care. So, from that statement, you could already kind of imagine how difficult it must be to get an abortion now. And after this, she had another secondary point that was, you're able to get an abortion at the age of 16 without a parent's consent, which is not true. She's making more of a generalization rather than talking about a certain state in general, or as a whole. From the Planned Parenthood website, you need parental consent in Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, and many other states. And in others, including California, you either need to notify your parent or guardian 48 hours before, or they don't need to give any consent at all. Or they don't have to know about it. So, yeah, and her second secondary claim was that society has lost respect for life. And this is kind of a general, like, everybody has lost respect for life. There's still people who believe that abortion is wrong, but there's been no clear consensus over when life actually begins while a fetus is developing. Religious beliefs stay very prominent in these arguments, which takes out all the scientific fact that would prove when life actually starts. And she also says that abortion is being used as an alternative for birth control, which is also kind of shaky, because women, like most women, still use birth control, and it doesn't work all the time. It's not 100% guaranteed that you're not going to get pregnant if you're still having sex without condoms and stuff like that. And obviously, if you don't want to get pregnant and you end up getting pregnant, you are most likely going to go through the process of getting an abortion. And it's not really used as an alternative, it's more of a backup plan, but it's not the straight away like, oh, I'm pregnant, I need to go get an abortion. But people are still using contraceptives to make it harder to get pregnant. And she also said, in 2011, 7.3% of all abortions occurred between 14 to 20 weeks of gestation, and 1.4% occurred either greater than or equal to 21 weeks gestation from the CDC. And, well, this is all still in the legal boundaries of when you can get an injection and when you should get an injection. Or, not an injection, an abortion. And 24 weeks is when abortion is no longer an option, because the fetus is actually viable, meaning that it could live outside of the mother at that time. And even though at 5 weeks old your baby's brain, spinal cord, and heart begin to develop, it's still not able to live and function on its own. It still needs the host mother, and it cannot live outside, making it non-viable. And it's still rough trying to decide when life is actually going to begin for this child, whether it's once it's outside of the mother's womb or while it's gestating. And her last secondary claim was women's mental health suffers. And she says that women suffer from depression, anxiety, PTSD, and elevated drug abuse and alcohol after getting an abortion. But most of these things are not directly correlated with the act of the abortion. Depression and anxiety and PTSD, they're usually caused by coercion into getting the abortion, or not having enough support from family members, or being told that they're making a terrible decision and that they're like going to hell or whatever. And immediately after that, she says that effects vary from woman to woman, which kind of shuts down her own argument, saying that all women will suffer from one of these symptoms, even though they could have already been suffering from it, or it did not directly happen because of the abortion. Thank you.
My name is Doe. All right, well, the main propositions identified, and then it was unclear whether or not there was a series of secondary claims that are being labeled, or just like some interpretation of what is going to be included in that particular point. When you get to the individual points, you signpost them pretty clearly, and I thought that that was okay. Your response on the first point basically says that there are restrictions, and so access has been changed in some way. I'm not exactly sure what this gets you in the long run. You kind of also dispute the consent issue. So are you in essence saying that the advocate has not accurately described the present system, that there are restrictions that protect either the fetus, which appears to be an implied goal of the advocate, or that protect women, for instance, if they're worried about all of these things that get listed later on in the last section. Maybe some of these 200 restrictions, for instance, you're talking about are designed to address those issues. People have to be counseled, people have to get consent, people have to have some kind of backup support on this. Certain doctors have to be available. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what some of those restrictions are, and they might apply to some of the other arguments that you're presenting. I did like the fact that you cited sources for both of those points, but in the long run, you kind of have to explain, so what does it mean to the advocate's argument if you were correct on these restrictions, and that in fact that a lot of states do require consent? How does that diminish the advocate's position? On the next issue concerning loss of respect for life, you kind of get into this discussion of where life begins, and I don't remember if the advocate really developed that as an argument. That may be the key issue on the topic, but I'm not sure it was the key issue in the argument that the advocate presented. And so there are questions as to why either person is spending time on this point. The birth control issue is, I think, an interesting point. If the advocate had presented any evidence that suggested that the women who were getting abortions are doing so because they failed to use birth control, because they were unconcerned with it, or for example, that had multiple abortions, that I think would tend to support their position. You, in essence, kind of assert, well, birth control is not perfect and sometimes it fails, and that's why most of these people are getting abortions. I don't remember what the advocate's evidence on this point was, and basically this is an assertion on your part, so I think you needed to have some evidence that suggests what the failure rate of birth control is, and any indication that the majority of abortions, or especially the vast majority of abortions, are sought only in the context of a failure from birth control, I think would strengthen that argument, but I didn't really hear any evidence like that. On the issue of viability, I'm not quite sure, why viability is being discussed here. It ties into the argument about where life begins and when somebody has rights or doesn't have rights, which is a value claim. I'm not sure how it applies to the advocate's particular point on this issue, and I didn't really hear a lot of evidence on that particular point either, just a kind of discussion of what the general subject was. The mental health issue, you challenged the correlation that's going on here. They're all presses on the advocate's reasoning. There's not any reason to doubt the evidence or the information the advocate presented, except that you suggest, well, maybe it's a result of coercion, which, by the way, is, well, if abortion were not available, people wouldn't be coerced into this sort of thing. I mean, that's the way that argument would probably play out in a longer context where, let's say, for instance, if you were having a debate on that particular point. So it's okay, those arguments are okay to make, for instance, if you don't have any preparation time. When you have a little bit more preparation time, I think you need to find something a little bit more substantive for those arguments. All right, thank you.